Indeed, Jessica. Now, August is supposed to be a time for relaxing and winding down. No one, though, seems to have told the stock markets you'd have needed nerves of steel to trade today. Around the world, investors, businesses and governments have been watching in horror as billions of dollars worth got wiped off the value of companies. Well, this, of course, follows last week's sell-off of $2.5 trillion in just 5 days. A downgrade on the US economy is partly to blame, but there does also seem to be a deeper fear about long-term prospects for growth and the ability of politicians here in Europe and in the United States to deliver. And talking politicians, we will be hearing from President Barack Obama later in the programme. He's due to give an address on what's going on the markets now. Well, joining me to discuss tonight in London, Jan Randolph is the Director of Sovereign Risk Analysis at IHS Global Insights. In New York, Georges Hugues is the President of Galileo Global Advisors. He's also the former Chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. Here with me in the studio tonight, Susan George is the President of the organisation ATTAC, the Honorary President. She also wrote the book Their Crisis, Our Solutions. And Ali Fatimi is a Professor of Finance at the American Graduate School of Economics right here in Paris. I'll start with you in New York, Georges, if I may. We've seen a lot of panic on the market today. Are you shocked by the extent of this sell-off?
No, I think I would not describe this as a panic. I think as long as we remain within 5%, I am not expecting that to be more than a serious correction. It's actually also an emotional reaction, because when you see what happens throughout the spectrum of the US Treasuries, they have remained remarkably stable. On the other side, today is a market where everybody has been there to try to avoid the worst. I think we are having a serious correction. I think the S&P downgrading is having an effect. And I believe that we will have to remain very careful, and people are emotional and anxious about it.
Jan Randolph in London, this of course was the first day's trading since that Standard & Poor's downgrade on the US economy. What do you think of the sell-off? Is it justified?
Well, I think it's broad-based. There are two concerns here. Obviously, it's the global growth picture. The economic numbers out of the US weren't very good. And if we don't get much growth, then the debt challenges become all the bigger. But basically, there's a lack of confidence in both Europe and US, whether governments can step up to the plate and take the necessary action. The ECB can stem the crisis, and it's demonstrated that today. It can stem the crisis by coming in and buying bonds, but it cannot solve the crisis. The solution must be with national governments, Rome, Madrid, and others, to basically get a grip of their finances and implement reforms, long-needed reforms. Finally, it's happening, to spur new growth, basically, through a bit of sensible deregulation.
Right, and we've seen a lot of medical comparisons drawn today. One that says the ECB plan is kind of like a paramedic arriving at the scene and delivering emergency first aid, but not dealing with the real disease, and the real disease is debt.
Well, it can't do. I mean, the debt's generated from the fiscal side, the budget side, which is in the control of the politicians. But Berlin and Frankfurt are absolutely right here. It's not for them to come in and solve the crisis. The root cause of the crisis is the lack of competitiveness in the southern Eurozone, the inability to generate sufficient growth. Therefore, you can't grow out of your debt problem, no matter how big it is. So it's got to start there. It's got to start in the southern flank of the Eurozone. All the ECB can do is stem the crisis, prevent the yields from going too high, but it's all it can do.
And this, Susan George, brings us to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? Because is there a feeling that governments and economies have become obsessed with paying down debt and reducing their deficit at the expense of long-term growth?
Well, I think it goes back much farther than that. Everyone's treating what's happening today and last week and so on as if this were something totally new. This stems from what happened in 2008, and that is when governments took on the debts that had been created by the banks, by the absolute irresponsibility of the banks. The Irish are the most blatant example because they just said, well, we'll pay everything Anglo-Irish and the other one, Allied, owed. And their debt has gone up, I did the figures the other day, by 275%. So, but all of them have taken on, if you look at the figures for debt in 2006 and 7, and then you look at them in 2009 and 10, you see how greatly it has grown. And it is because the governments bailed out the banks. Now the U.S. Government Accountability Office says that overall it was $16 trillion that the Fed spent, not just on U.S. banks, but also on European banks. The Société
But one might
Générale
argue
here.
there wasn't an alternative at the time. It was
Well,
let the,
maybe
let the
there was
banks
no
fail. There's just not an
alternative, but
option.
let's not say that the people have to pay the first time as taxpayers, and now they have to pay again in austerity, because the gentleman who just spoke seems to feel that you can have growth when you cut back demand, when you cut back everybody's salary, when nobody has a dime in their pocket or an euro. And I don't see how you can possibly imagine that you get growth from this kind of politics. It's just not possible.
Georges Ruger, formerly of Wall Street, sorry to interrupt you, formerly from Wall Street, I just wanted to see if you would like to respond to what Susan just told us there.
Well, I think there is absolute truth in what I just heard on both sides. First, the ECB definitely cannot be the solution to the problem. And it's an easy way for Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy to dump the problem on somebody else's lap. The reality is they are the ones who did not act when it was necessary. The second element is that it's very clear that what happened in the financial world was not good. But on the other side, most governments have been repaid, sometimes with profit, about those interventions. So it has a very limited impact on the increase of the debt. When you look at the United States, you have huge tax advantages that count for about $3 trillion of that debt. We have been fighting 2 wars, which is another $1.5 trillion. So we have been accumulating a series of gigantic expenses, and now we don't want to take the measures. And the measures is we need to tax more, but not only that, we also need to start, and particularly in Europe, looking at the question whether we need to keep all the companies that government own. And in Italy, for instance, it is going to be a change. The government owns too many companies and is indebted, and I think it needs to sell. Greek is the same. So we are still having here in the United States a feeling that the fundamental debate between tax and reduction of expenses, in other words, the reduction of expenses and the increase of revenues, is a point of content between the Republicans and the Democrats. And this disagreement is one of the reasons that has been used by the rating agency Standard & Poor's to justify what has effectively been a political downgrading.
Now, China, Ali Fatimi, China said yesterday, that the US must cure its addiction to debt. Is it fair to apply that also to Europe? Is that the heart of the problem? We must learn to live within our means.
Well, let me start first with the Standard & Poor's. I think I'm very glad that the other 2 rating agencies did not follow their act. S&P was very reluctant to do anything about Goldman Sachs, but it was ready and excited to downgrade the United States.
Lehman had an A rating.
Which is absolutely ridiculous what they did. The U.S. credit, if there's any credit which people in the world trust, that's the U.S. bond. So I think there's an overreaction. I think there also, as you know, August is a month of bear market. Always people get out of the market during the August. So that a number of things have accumulated. In response to what China is saying, so you have to look at China's overall perspective. China is beginning to act like superpower, and maybe they're thinking even of being one of the 2 or even the only one. So they're warning the United States, not only in the area of finance, they also warned the United States in Pakistan. They said, this is our territory. Stop interfering or taking sides with India. And now they're doing it on the finance. On the other hand, if I borrow money from my neighbor and I'm, extravagant, they're going to knock on the door and say, hey, it's our money. Remember that the biggest part of the U.S. debt is held by the Chinese. So they're worried about that. But on the other hand, I think Chinese are being very hypocritical because they manipulate their currency. They have been manipulating it. And part of the deficit of the US is due to the Chinese not playing by the rules.
But maybe if the Greeks and the Portuguese and the Irish could manipulate their currency, they might not be in the mess they're in now. I mean, that's part of the problem, isn't it? That
You just can't
they're
manipulate.
bound by these rules.
Yeah, but you can't manipulate once you're in a monetary union. There's
Exactly,
only one
but that's my
currency in
point.
Europe. Yeah. No, the Chinese are not devaluing in that sense. They're actually revaluing their currency. They are saying it's floating, but they're cheating. It's very different than if you have a flexible exchange rate. So Chinese are not there really to give anybody any lesson in financial honesty.
What do you think about that call then? We must learn to live within our means.
I'm
That's the
very
problem.
pleased by the remark about the ratings agencies because they were handing out triple A's on rotten securities, totally rotten, for a long time. They were handing them out like chocolates at Christmas, and now when they say something, everybody believes it. Actually, what the U.S. is paying out to service its debt is quite small. It's about 1.4 of GDP. Maybe that's too much, but and believe me, I agree with Monsieur Hugo that it's not a good way to run a country to have two ongoing wars, plus reducing taxes on the people who could pay down to 35%. They used to be 90 under Republican presidents like Eisenhower and Nixon, and now you've got people who are in the top 1% of the United States who have tripled their part of the national income in the past 30 years. And 0.1% is even sitting prettier. So those people do not pay taxes, and the Tea Party now has got Obama in a bind because they say no taxes and they want to destroy the government. The other thing that is important to remember is that public spending, if you look at the graphs, public spending over a period of 70 years is absolutely correlated with growth and with the improvement of an economy. And every single economy that is rich or was rich day before yesterday is one that is spending generally about 45 to 55% of everything in public spending. That's municipal, regional, national. But it's necessary to continue to do public spending if you want to maintain growth. The way the Tea Party wants it is to go back to 1937.
And I certainly want to talk a bit more about political guidance on this once we've heard from Obama. But let's stick to the markets for now. I want to talk a bit more about the ratings agencies. Jan Randolph, Standard & Poor's are basically saying that France, Finland, the UK, there are others, they're all more creditworthy now than the United States and the world's biggest and richest economy. They're losing credibility here, are they not?
Well, Standard & Poor's are making a point. They have a credit opinion, a private credit opinion, and they're saying that there is what's wrong with the US isn't its ability to service debt. It's got an extremely strong capacity to do that. That's the central pillar of anyone's rating. What they're saying is that the political discourse in Washington is so bad that compromise has become a dirty word, that they're unable to take the right decisions about putting the US back onto an even keel, medium and long term. Everyone agrees that we need to continue supporting growth, particularly in the US, because growth will ultimately be able, is the key to deliver us from these solvency issues. We need the growth. But the political discourse is so bad, they can't come to an agreement about moving those red lines, spending on the one side and revenue generation on the other. Both lines have to move, but the Tea Party prevented that from happening. So basically, we've had a Tea Party downgrade for political risk reasons.
May I give one sentence comment on that?
Please do, Susan. Come on.
Who elected Standard & Poor to make political comments on anyone? These ratings agencies have too much power, and what we need is public ratings agencies.
Well, we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful about not shooting the messenger. They are pointing to certain aspects of a sovereign rating, whether it's political risk or financial risk. No, they're simply saying, this is what we perceive to be the risk. Take it or leave it. They have power because they are deferred to. The entire financial system and all the players in it defer to them and their ratings, incorporate their ratings into their capital at risk ratings, they incorporate their ratings into their country limits, and to the extent that they do that they are conferring power onto them. Now, it is also true that worries regulators, and it should worry all of us, that we've only have 3 of them, and if they get a credit risk opinion wrong, like they did with subprime, that has systemic risk consequences, and we saw that with subprime. So there's every reason to have many more credit rating agencies, but fundamentally, what banks and financial players should be doing, they should be doing their own ratings. You cannot outsource core competence. It is the bank's job to spot risk, monitor risk, and to measure risk, and that means rate. It's useful to have second opinion. It's useful to have second opinion like the rating agencies, but fundamentally it is their core competence and craft to be able to spot, monitor and measure risk themselves. They should rate better than the rating agencies. They are, after all, running the risks. The rating agencies are simply providing opinion.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, in general, I agree with you. On this program, the night that they had reduced Portugal's rating, I defended that, and I said rating agencies are paid by their clients. They're not a government agency. They don't have to listen to you and me. They have to protect the interest of people who pay them, which are the companies. I got 1,400 objections on my website, on Facebook, saying that I was an American stooge and America wanted to destroy Europe by doing this. I wonder where they're there tonight.
But what about this point about austerity and growth? Can you have growth, Georges Hugo, at a time when you're imposing very harsh austerity measures and governments are being forced to do that because the ratings agencies are saying with such huge debts, they're just not creditworthy?
I think you're right, and the real issue is much more fundamental than what has generally been acknowledged. You cannot resolve the current problem only through an austerity program, because the consumer will stop consuming and you will not have growth and you are going down the drain, and it's a down spiral and a dangerous one. The reason why the US has such a lousy number on the second quarter is because the consumers are becoming increasingly worried and they spend less. So it cannot be resolved just by the austerity. It had to be shared. The banks have tried to avoid being involved and having to take any loss on the Greek bonds. What does that mean? General Electric does not pay taxes. The Greek well-off don't pay taxes. This is where the problem is. I think that people are willing to fasten their belt and be a little bit more moderate in their spending, but for the economy to grow, it is absolutely essential that they do not be the only target that is actually aimed for to resolve the problem.
All right, Georges Hugo, we're going to pick up on those points after that break. You sadly won't be staying with us. You're off to the French Channel, but many thanks indeed for your thoughts. We'll be getting more discussion on that after this very short break. We'll also have the headlines, and we are, of course, remember, expecting President Barack Obama to speak as well. Don't go away.